I think, and I've felt for a long, long time, that it is imperative for the United States and China to have a constructive and effective relationship. And I think doing so would be enormously in our mutual self-interest. For one thing, and maybe even primarily, because there are hugely consequential transnational challenges that will profoundly affect the future of both our countries, and that neither country can deal with alone. Climate change, which is existential and can change life on Earth, surely can only be dealt by the global community coming together. And I think the most effective way for that to happen is for the two largest economies in the world, China and the US, to come together and then coalesce the rest of the global community around addressing climate change. Nuclear weapons are another similar kind of issue which could affect on life on Earth as we know it. And again, no one country is strong enough or well positioned enough to deal with it by itself, but our two countries together, I think, could have tremendous impact in terms of bringing the global community together. Cyber warfare, cyber terrorism by state actors, but in some ways even more troublingly, or at least equally troubling, by non-state actors, is another area where the two countries together could have tremendous effect. Pandemics, terrorism more broadly, and the list goes on and on. I think our two countries have great potential, mutual benefit from having an effective trade relationship and effective investment relationship. Unfortunately, and I think both counterproductively and potentially even dangerously, there are many voices in each of our countries now who look at this relationship as likely to be adversarial and whose policy perspectives are a function of that view. How each of our countries thinks about, reacts to, and acts on our relationship is very much dictated or determined by the leadership, one case of China and the other case of the United States. Certainly in this country, there presently is, or at least to my eye, seems to be at the very top, an animus toward China, which, as I said, I think is woefully misguided. The administration from its beginning has talked about the trade imbalance between China and the United States. There were surely virtually no mainstream economists who think that a trade relationship should be evaluated on the basis of trade deficits or trade surpluses as between the two countries. That's a function of supply and demand in each country for the goods and services of the other. And with every country, it's going to be out of balance. The issues that I think we should be focused on, and now we seem to be more focused on, are the structural issues. And there's no question that China has a number of practices that are at variance with international norms with respect to trade and investment, such as subsidies, particularly in the technology area, import restrictions, requirements that a company that wants to produce or acquire in China share technology with a Chinese partner. Those aren't legislative requirements, but if you ask most American companies, they'll tell you that is the practical reality of doing certain kinds of business in China. A Buy China mandate for certain kinds of technology. And all of that, I believe, not only is against the interest of the global community, I think it's against the interest of China. I think what China would best do is move toward a more market-based economy, even if in a broader sense, there is a view in China that they want to have a much more state-directed economy than we have. The complex question is, how does the United States, which is a market-based economy, work with a more centrally directed economy to deal with these structural issues that are part of the industrial policy of a more state-directed economy? And I think there are approaches to come out on that which should be acceptable to both our countries, but that is not the approach the United States has taken. Tariffs should have been our last resort, and instead they were our first resort. And what we should have done is work together with the nations of the EU, Brazil, with Mexico and other countries, to come together as a unit, then sit down with China and discuss what would be in our mutual interest. But instead, we created trade friction with the rest of these countries. The tariff war, as it relates to our economy, is adverse in the sense that tariffs are a kind of a tax, and they increase prices to consumers, and they increase prices to producers, which reduces productivity and reduces global competitiveness. I think that the structural issues in China are important to our economy, so I think it's important that we address them. But we should have addressed them in a constructive fashion with our trading counterparts around the world who also have an interest in this being addressed. In the final analysis, had we met with China quietly, not in a very public way, and then we all come together, I think there are solutions to these problems that we probably could have had a pretty good chance of accomplishing. If instead we remain in the mode that we're in right now, I think the tariffs will continue to have an adverse effect on us. The retaliation in China will have a second adverse effect. And a third level of adverse effect on us is that companies are already looking at what's happening. I'm talking about American companies, already looking at what's happening. And though I don't know of anybody who's actually acted on this yet, thinking about their supply chains and should they begin to move supply chains out of China. And that would be a tremendous, in many ways, disruptive, or could be at least a tremendous disruptive effect on our economy. It would be a consequence of what we've been doing and could be totally avoided if we simply came together in a constructive fashion. So I guess I'd wind up by saying that I think there's a very serious imperative that we do the opposite of what we're doing right now, and that opposite is to come together and work together and create a constructive relationship. Recognize there'll always be differences, but to try to deal with, but not to try to deal with those differences in the context of a constructive relationship. I'll add just one more point. If we have adversarial relationships in trade, investment, and other areas, there's always a danger that could spill over into geopolitical matters, and that, of course, creates a whole other set of risks that are not in the interest of either of our countries.